minutes and then we will get started.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry?
The wind is dying. You should have gone out early.
And
It'll pick up again, I promise. Or at least we hope.
Okay, so you're welcome to leave your mic on for now. If anyone wants to ask any questions or anything like that, and then when we get started, you can mute yourself. It's nice to see some familiar faces, and also nice to see the list of countries expanding each week. So I think we had quite a few more from Singapore and the UK on this week, which is always great to expand the network a little bit. So I hope everyone that is staying home is enjoying their time at home. Just a reminder, if you've got any questions, the chat will be running throughout. You're welcome to throw any questions on there, and then as and when I'll jump on that and answer as many as I can in between slides, or if not, we'll get to it at the end. Also, some of the more relevant ones I do answer in the newsletter that will go out on Monday. So that follows our session today, and it includes worksheets. So everything we work through today, you get worksheets that you can work through in your own time, apply whatever it is that we're doing today to your own brand, your own concept, so that it's more relevant, more real, and that you can actually take away some of the learnings and start piecing together everything. If you haven't been on the first two webinars that we had, so the brand basics and one we did last week, then you can always find them on YouTube. And in the newsletter, there's the link to the YouTube channel that has. So we'll give it 2 or 3 more minutes. Hello, Anna. Hello, Maya. Some familiar faces. Melissa, glad to see that you managed to get on this week, which is great. Tamara, Tahila, Tegan, all amazing people doing amazing things. Feel free to drop me a line on Instagram at any time. Let me know who you are, what your brand is. It's really great to get to know the people that I'm talking to, so that if there's a way I can also tailor make any of the content to suit you, or put some extra bits and pieces in for a specific type of audience, that would be great. All right, we'll give it 1 or 2 more minutes and then get started. Shaheen's there, which is always good to know. So I hope everyone is, if you're in the UAE, we've just popped you, I've just popped you on mute, just because there was a bit of shuffling that I think might have been in a couple people's ears. So if you're in the UAE, I hope the warm weather hasn't been too much for you. It's certainly warming up very quickly. For those of you outside, I hope the weather is good enough to be indoors if you have to be, and get some fresh air outdoors when you need to. So today, I'm just going to sort of ease into it while we're waiting. Today, we're going to talk about 3 different concepts related to brand. It is important that if you do get confused or lost at any stage, to either shout out on the chat or after, and let me know if there's anything I can answer for you. They seem like they're quite similar in nature in terms of the concepts we're going to work through, but they complement each other. Well, the 2 fit in together, and then the 3rd is kind of the culmination of everything we've done over the last few weeks. If you've joined from week 1, you know that we started on the very basics of knowing what your brand is, knowing what your proposition is, knowing what it is that you want to put out to your audiences. And then the second part to that was knowing your audiences, because ultimately, no matter what product, service, or personal brand you are, you need to understand who you're talking to for that message to be conveyed properly. We also talked through how different audiences may require different messaging, and that how you need to tweak all your elements to suit the people you're talking to. Then last week, which by far is one of my favorite elements to talk about, was brand storytelling. Now, every story, every brand, every product, service, person has a story. What we need to do when marketing that, whether we're the brand owner or the marketing team, we need to take that story and make magic out of it. Now, it sounds really fluffy, and I know that, but ultimately, consumers today are not just interested in an exchange of service and investment. They don't just want to pay for something and take it home. There's an emotional connection and an emotional side to branding. There's an emotional side to marketing. And that ultimately is the trigger point for anyone that's willing to part with anything, whether it's time, whether it's money, whether it's space on their social media feed. If you're asking someone to part with something of theirs, these days you need to offer a value proposition, which is generally an emotional one. So that was what we covered last week. Again, a big focus of that was your consumer base, knowing what their struggles are, knowing what problems they may want you as a brand or a person to overcome. And that might not be something that's worn on their sleeve. It might be a sort of logistical issue, like, you know, keeping kids busy during lockdown. It might be something more practical, like I need to fit this hole in my life and I need a product to do it, but I want a product that's happy enough to ease my emotional needs around it. So last week we talked about brand storytelling. I hope that any of you that got the worksheets were able to work through it, because it really was a step-by-step way to build yourself up to your brand story and what makes you special. We also talked about how that process evolves. So there was the concept of evolution with your brand story, and it will never stay the same for X amount of years. Every 3 to 6 months, you need to keep revisiting elements of your story, because it will change as you grow and mature and your business grows and matures. I know friends that are, you know, even on here, that started off at one point, and then as they grew and as they sort of discovered who they were in their brand space, their story evolved, their logo evolved, their overall look and feel evolved. And that's essentially what being in a branding world is. It's working really fast, it's evolving really fast, but that's not something to fear. It's something to celebrate, because it means that as you're evolving, you're improving. As you're improving, you're growing. And similarly, one would hope the business does alongside you. So to get into what we're going to talk about today, if any of you do want any of the past newsletters, webinars, or worksheets, please just drop me a line, whether it's on Instagram at BeWellBranded or via email. I'll share the details again at the end. I'm happy to send it to you, because I really want you to benefit from the step-by-step building from the foundation up that we've done. So today we're going to talk about 3 concepts. And I'm going to start by just throwing them out, and then we'll go into them in more detail. So the first one is brand identity. Now, your brand identity is basically how you dressing up your brand. I'll put the presentation up. I want you to understand that how you dress your brand is critical. So brand identity is basically the clothes your brand wears. It's, you know, your logo, your typeface, your color. It's all the things that matter when someone looks at your brand. And then the other big word, which is going to be my favorite word that you're going to be so tired of by the end of it, but it is the most important concept that we're working with, and it's consistency. So we talked about, in the brand story phase that we were in, we talked a lot about authenticity and being honest and being true to who you are. And that is going to be an overhanging word forever, no matter what stage of branding you're in. That is going to be there. That is going to be an important word. And the second big word we're talking about is consistency. And in today's conversation, consistency more than anything is going to be one of the more important things we talk about. So we're going to start on brand identity, and we're going to move from brand identity to a concept called brand image. Now, brand image is different to identity in that your brand image is how your audience sees you. So we've got different vantage points. Brand identity, how you see your brand, how you color your brand, how you pretty up your brand. Brand image, how your audience sees you, so the outward in. And then we've got the final big build-up that we're all aiming for, and that is brand equity. Now, our equity defines how the market values us on the back of everything that we're doing. So all our marketing efforts, everything that we're doing, brand equity is how our audience sees us. So we're starting today on brand identity. Last week, I had a few people drop me a note and say, hey, Zah, it's the first time I tuned in. Just, you know, it would be great to start off. My friends are joining, to let them know who you are. So I'm going to spend 2 seconds on this. My name is Zahira Marti. I'm based in Dubai. I've been working in brand management and PR for over 15 years across various industries, from crisis PR in South Africa to lifestyle, hospitality, leisure, travel. My background is mixed between media and client servicing and agency. So being both sides of the camera, which has been really beneficial to understand how the whole system works. And I have based myself out of Dubai for the last sort of 9.5, 10 years. My market experience ranges from Africa, which is where I'm from, I'm South African, to a little bit in the USA with pop-up events. The Middle East is where the crux of my career has been in the last sort of 9 or 10 years, and a little bit of work in Australia. Now, between media, client, and agency, you get quite a good overview of how the different facets support each other. So purely client servicing, which means you work in-house. So you work in an agency, so you servicing your clients. So that's, I've owned an agency for the last 8 years. All the clients that I had, the type of PR and branding was client servicing. When you're client side, which I've worked for a few years before that, you sort of dishing out your briefs. You're in the more bossy position, so you're dishing out your briefs to all the agencies. And then media is what it says on the label. It's working in TV and radio. I'm also the mum to a 2-year-old, and I put that in there because if I look tired, that's the explanation. Moving on to Well Branded. So Well Branded was formed literally 3 or 4 weeks ago. It's the brainchild of, I'd say 18, maybe even more months of me sort of waking up and deciding that maybe being an agency owner isn't what I want to do anymore. I still love what I do in terms of industry, but maybe the side that I'm working on isn't fulfilling me anymore. So I've decided to move everything to an online platform. It is dedicated to building community, which is my number one focus. I love people, so I love being around them. I love teaching them. I love working with them. I love speaking to them. And it's focused around brand and PR as a niche. So I know there's a whole bunch of amazing business communities, and hopefully we can all plug in and work together. But this is purely focused on brand, PR, learning, connecting, collaborating with loads of you. There's a couple of people that I love on here today that we'll be collaborating on that do amazing things. And I think the world has gone from, last week we had a question about how do you differentiate yourself against competitors? And I think the world is moving slightly away from competitors and more towards collaborators. And everything needs to plug into each other. So for the moment, Well Branded is dedicated to free online webinars and resources and basically just sharing everything that I can with you over a period that I think people need it most. It will evolve in a couple of months to being a membership-based community. It'll still always have free resources, but there'll be exclusive opportunities to the membership community and a fully digital PR solution, which I stand to be corrected, but doesn't currently exist, where you can jump on, send a request, and out pops your press release, and out pops your PR solutions, out pops your graphic solutions. So it's sort of taking away some of the cost for small brands that might not want to have full service agencies. It's sort of taking away that need. So that in a nutshell is Well Branded. Moving on to our subject for today, and we're going to be talking about brand identity. Now, brand identity is when a brand creates an experience, it cultivates a community, and it's all about amplifying the customer's demand. Now, experience is something that we talked about. You start with your story. So you start someone's experience with your brand by the story you tell them, the catchment, the big hug that you give them to come in. And it cultivates it around its scope and its offering and its services. It refers to all your digital elements. So when you're thinking about brand identity, you're thinking about things like logos, like typography, like colors, like packaging, like messaging, all the sort of outward, the clothes to your brand, if you could call it that. And it reinforces the reputation, it reinforces the story that we created, it reinforces all the elements that you're telling people by tangibly putting it in front of them. Now, it is critical that one of the main elements that you consider with brand identity is consistency. And that doesn't mean that you can't change. It doesn't mean that things can't transition over time. It just means that you need to put a little bit of thought when developing it from scratch so that that evolution process isn't going to be too drastic. So when you're investing in either a team or software or whatever it is that you want to invest in to create your brand identity, think about all the aspects that I'm going to list now, which are your key pillars of what creates your brand identity. So your positioning, which is something that we talked about last week and the first week. Where do you want to sit in the market? Where do you see your brand fitting into what the market is offering today? Where do you see it in with your collaborators, with your competitors, with everyone that is being appealed to by your brand? Second of all, and it's very, very important to do thorough market research. And it may be a case of purely on social media, if that's your primary channel. It may be through jumping online and assessing the top 6 websites that you think are what you want to be like, what you don't want to be like, and who you're currently like, and seeing where you fit in with that. It also is considering, and we spoke about this last week, the humanization of your brand. Now, in the current day that we're in, brands require human qualities. They need to be looked at like someone you would either befriend, you would maybe date, you would maybe want to hang out with. Your brand needs to be given human characteristics to understand the type of brand it is, the personality it has. Is it funny? Is it serious? And that becomes relevant to the next couple things, which basically is bringing to life that personality. So for example, and I will get on to examples of really strong brand identities because it'll explain to you where things sit and how you can understand it. So when you're considering the personality of your brand, the next step you'd go on to then is putting that into practice. So creating a logo, creating a color palette, creating typography, which is basically the type of letters that you would use, or the way you position your letters is called typography, like typing, the typography, supporting graphics. Now, if you think of some of the strongest brands in the world, probably you will consider some of the most simple. So I think one of the biggest problems I've seen with clients is that they overthink the stage. They want to be too fashionable, too trendy, too current, which is great, but also consider the lifespan of your brand. You want to be here in 10, 15, 20 years. You want to be relevant. You want to appeal to the same type of reputation that you maybe started with or trying to build. Again, I'm going to say it's absolutely fine to evolve. It's absolutely fine to change. It's absolutely fine to revisit. But all the cookies or the brownie points that you're earning from day one ultimately are going into the same pot. So for you to recognize, or for your audience to recognize that that pot is the same, regardless of how you evolve over the years, an element of consistency needs to be there. But more importantly, try to limit the amount of change. So for example, if you think of the top of your head, some of the best brands you've ever thought of, these three will ultimately pop to mind. Apple, simple, very little change over the last years. Their typography is the same. I guarantee you, if you saw that symbol anywhere, as you do now, there's no lettering, there's no text, there's nothing attached to it. You know that that's Apple. And that is the strength of their brand identity. Similarly with Google, I would almost guarantee you, if I took the words away from Google and I put color banners, so the blue, the red, the yellow, the blue, the green, the red, and I just put that in front of you and I said, when you see these blocks, let's say I put them into rectangular bars for argument's sake, what brand pops to mind? I guarantee at least 80% of you will say Google. This is an example of a strong brand identity. Coca-Cola is my favorite example. I studied it. When you go to brand school, they teach you about it nonstop. Coca-Cola is the ultimate example of the strongest brand identity, the strongest brand image, the strongest brand equity. And it's taken many, many years to get there. And they have changed. Their logo has changed over the years. Their bottle design has changed. They've incorporated plastic. They have changed. They have evolved. But their brand equity remains strong because their brand identity has been relatively consistent. So I'm going to move on to a case study, which will hopefully illustrate some of this. So a few years ago, Airbnb decided they need to refresh. They were moving from being a small company. They were now appealing to a much larger audience. They had to move away from the sort of trendier script-based logo type, the more iconic kind of stylized A. They wanted to be more general. They wanted to appeal to an international market. They also wanted to convey their personality of being friendly, of being international, of being well-traveled, of belonging to various different sectors. So from nature to city to, because as a business, that's where the business was evolving. It was moving away from being based out of San Francisco as a pretty cool company that started up to being an international, appealing to a broad range. And what they did, instead of going from this very stylized, very cool, very almost graffiti-esque identity, is they moved towards something that was simple. It was just an icon. It was universally recognizable. If you blocked out the text and you just saw the icon, 9 out of 10 of us that use Airbnb would probably recognize that. For example, if you have the app on your phone, the app doesn't say Airbnb, the app has the icon. And that's the strength of brand identity. So when creating your brand identity, this is what you need to consider. Now, that doesn't mean, simple doesn't mean boring. Simple just means easily recognizable, easily adaptable. So Airbnb, for example, if you jump onto their website or if you Google Airbnb brand identity, you will see that their logo is applied in multiple ways. They've got videos with the icon and videos changing of different destinations through there. The text changes color, they have patterns, they have stripes, they have contrast, but the ultimate font, the typeface, the icon, the colors all change. Now their palette is broad. Your palette might be narrow. You might decide that you want to start black and white and gradually increase the colors you throw into it. Your identity is completely flexible based on your direction, but elements of it need to always remain consistent. So whether you are in a different country, a different language, a different medium, whether it's app, social, web, print, your iconography, your typography needs to be recognizable. And when you reach that point of it being recognizable, you know that you've achieved a good brand identity. Now, if your brand identity is something that you're still playing with, like full disclosure with Well Branded, I'm not 100% on where I am with the brand. I created it 3 or 4 weeks ago. I'm toying around with a few different types of typefaces, with a bit of typography. My style on social media is varying from a bit more sort of light colored black and white to sort of bright and bold, bit of pink and yellow here and there. Now I might decide that my brand image is to stay within a certain type of fonts, but vary my color palette. My direction might be to play with certain types of typography and pull away from imagery and icons completely. So I don't have like a WB wound up into a cool icon. I'm at that stage that probably you're at now if you're at the start, where I'm playing around and also testing what is being responded to well in the market. And that's also fine. That goes back to your stage of market research. So throughout this, remember that it's a process, remember that it's evolution, and remember that consistency needs to be there. Like if you look at the newsletter you get, there's roughly 2 to 3 fonts. I might play with the size, I might play with where I put it, I might throw in a completely contrasting one as a header to something that I really want to stand out, like maybe a quote. But ultimately, I stay within 2 or 3 types of fonts that I then transplant to any print material that I create, any ebooks that are coming up. It's about starting to develop that identity. And it's basically like who you are. It's your style of dressing. It's the type of clothes you choose. It's the type of hair color you have. There's got to be elements to consistency, even though you might vary. So like with your brand story, under your main brand identity, you might vary for certain campaigns, you might change for certain features or certain seasons, but ultimately under your umbrella, there needs to be variability. And when you create your brand, the best way to monitor and control that is to create a brand guideline document. So whether you're doing it yourself via tools like Canva or other online resources, or you have a graphic designer that you're working with, freelance, or an agency, when you're creating your brand identity, you need to always have an identity document. It's like your constitution for your brand. And you might revise that, you might add to it, you might take away from it, but you've got to start with a brand guideline document. And I'll send you an example of one with your worksheets, a very simple one where you outline the colors you're playing with, the fonts you're playing with. If you're doing headers, the rough size that you work with. If you're doing letterheads, where does your logo go? Where does your typeface go? So all these elements are laying the foundation for your brand identity, which ultimately is going to impact the subject we're moving on to next, which is our brand image. Brand equity is something that we talked about later on, and we'll come back to it, but brand image is where we're going to start. Now, your brand image is really, really important. It's the perception that a consumer has about your brand. It's how they see you out in the market, and it ultimately relates to a strong brand or a weak brand, because no matter how strong or weak your identity is, it has to work hand in hand with your brand image for people to see an impact. Now, if you have a strong identity, if you have a strong image, it will impact on the consumer's buy-in, on their buy-in of your story, of the buy-in of your product, and ultimately for them to part with an investment towards whatever proposition you're putting out to them. So a strong brand image, which is how everyone else sees you, makes the process of loyalty, makes the process of possession, makes the process of emotional connection that much stronger. So they might relate to the story, they buy in and they associate with the image you're putting out. And ultimately, they're moving then closer towards their image of how they see your brand. So brand image, to give you an example, is one of the pillars most closely related to public relations. So public relations is the management of your reputation. Brand image is the title we give to your reputation. So how people in the market see you. Now, a positive image invokes emotions such as confidence, such as loyalty, such as forgiveness if you make an error, if your deliveries run late, if you post something that might not appeal to all your audiences. I gave an example 2 weeks ago of a food brand in one of the markets that around Easter posted a very indulgent recipe. Now, the food brand itself has a positive image. It is very well known. It's a mid to upper end food brand in South Africa. It put out an example that if you reviewed the comments, I'd say 80% of them were not positive. They felt it was too indulgent. They felt it was very excessive. It was a very rich recipe that they were sharing. And whilst that may not break their brand image, having that strong image is what allows the recovery from something like that to be a lot faster, because your consumer base is more forgiving. They have a sense of loyalty. They have a sense of forgiveness and associate that with a good reputation and a good relationship with you. So they basically saying, we know you sell us great things. We love your brand. We love the experience we have in the store. We love your customer service when we need to come in and return things. We love how you project yourself. Your identity speaks to us and appeals to us. However, we're not happy with this, but because we know and we're falling back on your brand image, we will forgive this and move on, but we'll let you know what we think. And that's the beauty of social media, which is a completely different beast, which we'll get to in the coming weeks. Now, it's possible to build your brand image through various medium: strong advertising, good public relations, we spoke about last week during the current situation, and give something without expecting something back. All these mediums, all these activities, all these efforts ultimately contribute to your brand image. So like you would manage, I don't know, if you were, I think 90% of the girls in the world, moms and dads are always saying, how you behave in your younger years, it's your reputation. You need to look after your reputation. You can never repair reputation. Similarly, brand image is the equivalent to a brand or business. It's trying to manage yourself publicly, to how the public view you. And by putting out good adverts, by putting out good messaging, by managing your social media to never have maybe bad language or poor imagery, or knowing your audience, knowing what emotional connection your audience requires from you, bouncing back to what we spoke about last week on knowing what their trigger points are, knowing what their habits are, knowing where they like to hang out. Are they mums? Are they dads? Are they young people? Are they old people? All those elements, all those funnels that we dealt with in the previous weeks will funnel into what you know to be a good decision or a bad decision when it comes to your brand image. So the problems, and there are them, the problems with a good brand image is you're unable to depict a satisfactory brand image, and the consequences can be felt quickly. So if you aren't able to maintain the brand image, so there's the word consistency, then the consequences of that will be equally as harsh. So our audiences, through loyalty, become quite forgiving, become quite supportive. But as you know, if you're in business, loyalty is only as good as the brand supports the customer base. So whilst we aim to build loyalty and maintain loyalty and be supportive, you've always got to tip in a little bit more than you're going to get from your consumer base to maintain that balance. So you need to be very careful that when you try and change too drastically. So once you've built your identity, you've got brand image. Brand image is your reputation you have in the market. People learn to associate with that. They recognize that. They become drawn to that. Then any sudden change, so any drastic change, so any variation from a level of consistency may impact you negatively. So whilst it's often put out as a disadvantage of a strong brand image, I see it as a caution, something to hold your audience's hands if you are approaching a point of a big change. Now, if we go back to the example of Airbnb, they made quite a big change, but from a very small base. So we're at a point where we want to expand. So they were at the bottom of their funnel. We want to expand that way. If we're going to make big and critical changes to our brand identity to ultimately impact our image, now is the time to do it. So before we explode out of the market we're currently in to all the markets we're going to reach, we need to make the big changes now so that the audiences we acquire as we grow and as we move up and as our base grows, they're along the process from the start, rather than them buying into our identity, them buying into our story, and midway throwing them a curveball and changing completely. So like the process of evolution, you've always got to consider various parties. It's not always how you see your brand and the identity that matters most. It's identity in a very careful balance with your image that will impact your overall brand equity, which is where we're going to move on to next. So when we're talking about equity, we are talking about how the market sees or values your brand. So it's a marketing term. It sounds very fancy. If you sit in meetings with marketeers, you'll hear it, oh, you know, this will really impact our equity. This will affect our equity. Essentially, it's how your business is affected by all the factors around you and how that affects the value and the value that you have in the market. So how it affects your business. So brand equity is a marketing term that describes a brand's value. Now, value is determined by a consumer's perception of how the consumer sees you. It's determined by the experiences that a consumer has with the brand, maybe your colleagues or competitors have with the brand. It's determined by the key stakeholders that are linked to your brand and how they value, how they associate, and how they appreciate what you have put out in the market. Now, if people think highly of a brand, we'd refer to it as having a positive brand equity. If people see it negatively, similarly, you'd say it has a negative brand equity. So if a brand consistently underdelivers, if their customer service has been really bad, if they haven't been returning phone calls or emails or replying to messages on social media, this negatively impacts brand equity. To give you an example, there's a brand currently in our Middle East market. And to be fair, I think it's a very unusual situation to refer to, but it will illustrate my point. There's a brand in the market that has always done service and delivery. So it's always been a home delivery service. They sell products, so they're tangible, and they constantly will give you a good or a rough estimate when you place your order online of how long your items will take to deliver. Now, given the current pressure and the current sort of influx based on online delivery with the closure of stores and retail outlets, there has been a lot of pressure placed on delivery services across the board, regardless of industry, in every market, particularly markets that are doing lockdowns and restrictions. This particular brand, the average delivery time used to be 2.5, maximum 2.5 weeks. Currently, they aren't delivering up to 6 weeks. There's your first problem. So the brand image of X amount of delivery time, X amount of service requests, X amount of follow-up is now being affected. Their team are not responding to messages, DMs, emails, customer care lines aren't being answered. People are being charged, so their cards are being run online when they make purchases, but no refunds are being done, no responses, no follow-up requests, no sort of effort to meet you halfway. None of this is happening. So all of this is impacting the brand equity of this company. Will it or will it not affect it long term? That way, you have to wait and see. You don't know on the tail end of this. Other brands that people would have turned to during this time may replace the loyalty, may replace that customer base. So if you can't get from customer A, or you can't buy from a certain store at the moment because of their delivery and their poor service, you're turning to a second store, and you might find that at a time you needed them most. So going back to the emotional part of it, the time you needed them most, the time where you needed something quickly for whether a want or a need, the second store was able to serve that need. Therefore, they fill that place in your loyalty bank. You are buying into their story now more than the others because it fitted in with your emotional needs. So the emotional connection is there, and the loyalty is then shifted from company A to company B. So that's a very simple example. And again, it's taking place in quite a difficult time for companies, but it's a perfect example of how brand identity remained perfect, recognizable. We know that they're the ones we go to. We don't need to see their logo. We know what we get. We know the service delivery from their identity. We've bought into their brand story. We've been loyal to them. We've always shopped at them. We've always, if we need something for our home in X, Y, and Z category, we go to shop A. However, the brand image is now affected because at a time where we need them, at a time where we need things delivered at a certain time, where we have a certain expectation of an experience with the brand, they aren't delivering. Therefore, their equity with me or with their customer base is becoming negative, and the shift happens to another brand. So if we're going to talk about competitor analysis, if we're going to talk about how to acquire competitor audiences, these are some of the things that need to start rolling around in your head. How do I build my equity to maybe exceed someone else in the market? How do I build my equity to positively impact the audiences that I'm serving? Again, please let me know if there's anything that you want me to stop, carry on, and we can definitely do that. So brand equity, again, these are just case studies. You don't need to worry too much about reading the slides. I've put it there in case someone loses track or gets distracted, you can catch up with me. But these three brands, Colgate, Tiffany & Co., McDonald's, I guarantee you that if I took elements out of their identity, you would recognize it. If I left the identity in a complete package, so you just saw the three logos that are on the side of your screen, you would automatically form a picture of an experience. It may be positive for most, it may be negative for some, but you'd form an experience based on the reputation that brand has in the market. And that would then determine whether your experience and your image directs you to the positive brand equity or a negative brand equity. So like I said in the slide, Colgate is a name that has been popular in households forever. We all know the Colgate smile, the Colgate ads, the big bright white teeth. They're probably the primary reason that teeth whitening started happening. We all wanted the Colgate smile. Now, just that statement alone demonstrates the strength of their brand image and the strength of their equity, because we start referring to good smiles by their brand. So we don't just say you have a bright smile, you have a white smile. We're associating a business and a brand to that smile. So that alone will tell you the type of equity and the level of positivity that Colgate has in the market. So when we know Colgate are convinced that a brand will deliver satisfactory results, we know this, we believe this, we're loyal to this belief. Colgate created an image in the mind of its customers using better looking teeth, looking after our teeth a good way. They're the ultimate authority on dental health and dental well-being and oral health. All these terms are terms that have been created via their brand story, via their identity, and via the image they have in the market. So all of these elements funnel into their positive brand equity. And that relates again to the concept of emotional branding. It becomes the brand we trust. It becomes the brand we associate with bright smiles. It becomes the brand we name a bright smile by. And ultimately for Colgate, it's the brand that if we're looking at a shelf, we will go and pick up, and often regardless of the difference in cost, because of the positive brand equity. So this is where brand equity ties into your business. Having a positive brand equity will impact on the consumer's willingness to spend a bit more on your brand. So anyone that has a mid to premium brand and you know your proposition, your value, your unique selling point, which we can dub USP, that you're putting out in the market is premium. You know it's better, you believe it's better, and you price it accordingly. That's where your brand equity is going to be that supporting net that brings you up and helps the consumer say, I don't mind spending X amount more on this brand because the image and the ultimate equity tells me that I'm getting something better. I'm getting something premium. I'm getting something that I can trust because I know it. So Tiffany & Co., similar example. All the things that float into your head the minute you see the logo, the minute I say the name, it's in the minds of the consumers as top quality. We know that it's expensive. We know that it's premium. But believe it or not, being expensive and being premium is one of the reasons it has a stronger brand equity and loyalty from us, because we associate those things to a higher quality. We associate it to luxury. We associate it with all the movies we've seen, all the Reese Witherspoon-esque type proposals that we've seen in movies, all that romantic, emotional, rom-com feel we get from the entire movie. Believe it or not, the subtle, which is not so subtle branding that you see in these movies, it costs brands a lot of money to do that, because they know that their investment is impacting millions of people's image of their brand. So, simple example, Mel Gibson and Helen Hunt, What Women Want, they were randomly pitched a Nike campaign. Now, Nike, along with Coca-Cola, along with Google, along with Apple, one of the most sterling examples of positive brand equity globally. Nike would have invested a fair chunk to have their campaign in that movie, because without you realizing it, there were so many elements of the Nike brand that was sold to you subliminally, that was sold to you emotionally from their presence in that movie. So brands that have built equity have done it over a long period of time. There's my first point. Nothing happens overnight. Have done it through various mediums. So you see Nikes in stores, you see Nike on social media, you see Nike on billboards, you see Nike in movies. So Nike's in your home or in your theater. It's on your couch with you. It is telling you that if you want the premium shoe, if you want the cool shoe that Hollywood's making movies, that Hollywood movies are ad campaign briefing for, you're going to get a Nike. And if you're a woman on the road, I mean, I can remember the pitch in that movie like yesterday. On the road, running at night, you can hear her breathing. That's me. I want to be that person. I want to be this woman just swiftly running through the streets of whichever American city it was set in, because that's the proposition, that's the value proposition, that's the equity Nike has with me. McDonald's, completely different, not luxury, not premium, but equally high equity with us. It's inexpensive, it's quick, it's a food store service that has really sold its story, that has really sold its jingle, that has really sold Ronald to the world. So it might be a brand that we associate with binge meals, cheat meals, but it also is a brand, if a lot of us dig deep inside, that we associate with happiness. And if you think they've named their kids' meals the Happy Meal by mistake, you're mistaken. It's emotional branding. And if you took away the McDonald's, if you took away the red, the golden arches, the strength in their equity is evident by the number of ways their identity can be almost shape shifted. Like in Australia, for example, it's not McDonald's, it's Macca's. Their actual branding says Macca's. Now, in a traditional sense, you think, well, you can't just take a brand name and change it to suit a market. But the strength of their equity, the strength of their image is that great that you can tweak the brand to be relatable to the market that it's placed in, and it still has equally high equity. So when we're talking about these brands, and I know these are world, global, huge brands, but it illustrates the key elements of brand image. It illustrates the key elements of brand equity. And I will come to why this is important and why this is important for us and how we can put this into our own practice. So again, more examples of brand equity are Apple, Facebook, Maggie noodles. These are all ways that when you think about these brands, if I asked you to take away 90% of what you know and you just saw one element, you saw a logo, you saw a tagline, you even saw a font. And this is a good example for a local brand in the Middle East, Emirates. If you see the Emirates font used in other brands, which it is used, so that the slightly Arabesque way of writing English words, if you are aware of the brands around you, without seeing Emirates, without seeing airplanes, without seeing anything, you will say that that is the Emirates font. And it's not just for writing, it's not just for typography. It relates to things like music, it relates to things like sound, it relates to things like people, and it all comes down to the personality of the brand. It all comes down to all the elements that we have been funneling in the last couple of weeks. So audience, knowing your audience, knowing your region, knowing your markets, knowing your personality, building a strong story, knowing the characteristics that appeal to different people, and then getting to a point of simplicity, getting to a point of knowing what your logo needs to be, what your typography needs to be, knowing all the elements and the colors that speak. You know, color therapy, logo therapy, these are all things that we'll break down further. But in a very simple way, if you're looking at your color palettes and you're at that point where you're deciding what color palettes you want to use, think back to the personality of your brand. So is my brand feisty? Is my brand calm? Is my brand chilled out? Is it friendly? Is it serious? Very rarely will you see a yoga studio with the same colors as the Maggie Noodle brand. Why is that? Red, very strong, very forceful, very active color. Yellow, also very bright, very awakening, very refreshing. Yoga is a calm activity. If you associate a personality to the activity of yoga, you think calm, you think meditative, you think ocean, you think nature, you think water, you think sand. So similarly, when you're drawing that identity from those elements, from all the things you roll around in your head, which was one of the exercises we had last week, is to spill all the words, all the imagery, all the ideas. When you think of your brand, when you close your eyes and think, and this applies to personal, business, product, anything. If you close your eyes and you think of your brand, what are all the things that roll around in your head? If you're financial, you might think, I want to be taken seriously. I want to be, the concepts of accuracy, of detail, of, thorough, hardworking. What words roll around with that? What pictures do you see in your head when you see that? All these elements are what tie into your brand identity. That's where you draw your source from. So if I'm thinking of well branded, I'm thinking of myself. I'm the person behind the concept. What kind of typography I like. I really like the kind of Dido style font. I really like the way case study is written on your screen, because for me, it's a balance between that serious, more classic, maybe more elegant side of my personality, as well as a more playful, down to earth, let's laugh, let's have fun, let's throw out silly examples. I threw an example of a gangster last week. For me, the fonts that I've used so far with Well Branded are exactly the type of things that balances off my personality, and for me translates to the Well Branded personality. I'm also quite a every day is a different day kind of person. Does that mean that I use a different font in everything that I do? No. That's where the brand identity guidelines comes in to formalize. Now, it's the easiest thing to give you an example of me because I'm currently going through that process. Your process might be different. You might be at the start, you might be halfway through, you might have had your brand for 5 years, 10 years, and you're now looking to refresh it. It all still applies. So when you're considering all of these things, consider all the elements that make up the personality of your brand, that make up your brand story. If you've got a brand story that talks about thinking about a mom reaching out to her mental health, understanding that it's really tough, being the brand shoulder to cry on, like you can humanize your brand to that point where you want to be the shoulder someone cries on. If your brand's more about meditation and yoga, you might want to be the supportive arm to help people recover from the inside out, to get in touch with who they are. All these concepts will then translate in color, will translate in icons, will translate in text. And often I say to people, when you're going through this phase, a lot of it is playing. Like you might watch the masterclass series on Instagram, and there's an interior designer that gets on there and she starts talking about color and how color works in the home. And all she does is she takes a whole range of colors and starts painting it on the wall, stands back and looks at it. And I want you to do the exact same thing with your brand identity exercise. Take a whole bunch of fonts, write the name of your brand in that font, and just play around, keep changing the font. And there will be, I guarantee you, there will be fonts that you eliminate automatically. You're going, oh, that's definitely not me. Like, I don't want to be the hieroglyphics, type of font. There'll be some that you go, oh, I didn't think about that, but that's quite nice. Or you might go, that's an amazing font, but it's too much at the top. I might keep that for a subtitle or a slogan, or I might do my newsletter in that font really small. A lot of this stage, a lot of this week's worksheets are about playing, and about playing with the different elements that will bring together what we're talking about today. Now, to go back to our brand equity model, because ultimately we started off with brand identity, we moved on to brand image. So we're talking about the way you see your brand and how you put it out to the market, the way the market sees your brand, which is the image it sees you as, so your reputation. And all of this together with your brand story, your personality, funnels into your brand equity. Now, if we look at the brand equity model by Branson Johnson, it's a unique set of real or perceived distinctions attached to a brand by customers. And that's the most important thing to realize is you can't directly influence your brand equity. You influencing the market, which then builds up that equity, which makes it tricky because you have to work a little bit hard for it. And that's a good challenge to have because it means you need to be on top of your game. You need to be constantly researching what goes on. And all these colored circles that you're seeing on your screen, the associations you have, if we're talking, a great example of that would be in a personal brand capacity. If we see a celebrity or a sports person and we don't like a story we've seen in the press, we don't like that they may have, always an extreme example, but always illustrates my point. If we don't like that X, Y, or Z has cheated on their wife, that association impacts their brand equity with us. Image and personality, we spoke about earlier today. It's how everyone perceives you. It's the human characteristics of your brand. Familiarity, so how you can relate, how familiar you can be to their environment, to their needs. Your awareness, which means how prominent you are in the market. And I will share this model with you. How prominent you are in the market. So where are your touch points? What are your channels? Where is your audience accessing you? The loyalty that you build, and loyalty is 90% emotion, 10% everything else. So the loyalty that you're building in your market, and this comes down to everything, even service. You know, I would hope, and I use my example again because it's real and it's a learning curve. It's not perfected. I would hope that from week to week, my base of people tuning in grows. I'd like to believe that that loyalty grows, that people are relating to what I'm putting out. They're being aware of what I'm putting out through social media or newsletters, that the image and the personality of Well Branded as a brand is appealing to people, that my associations through examples, through illustrated case studies, through all the things that I am linked to, that people are assessing when deciding if they want to buy into my equity, whether that's appealing to you. And it's a case of preference. There's a number of options. I would like to believe, or I'd like to build my customer base to the point where my equity means that I am a preference. And availability. And this is always something that I think, you know, we had a question last week about luxury, and luxury is a completely different beast, and we'll deal with that on a separate issue. But even as a luxury brand, there needs to be a sense of availability. There needs to be a sense of reliability. There needs to be a sense of relatability to some extent. Now, availability also, if you're in a product and service base, availability will relate to how good you can deliver, or how well you can deliver on your brand promise, on the experience. So all of these multicolored circles on your screen now is what lives in the hearts and minds of your customers. It's what they keep with them. It's what they hold on to, and it's what will impact your brand equity. So if we just quickly refresh, I try very hard to stick to my 1 hour. I may run over a little bit. If we quickly refresh on terminology today, brand identity is the look and feel of your brand. So how you're dressing it up with typography, with imagery, with colors. Brand image is how your audiences see your brand, and all the things that you do from a brand story, the brand personality, the identity, your communication, everything that you're pushing out to market is what will define your brand image. And brand equity is the value. So how much value they see in your brand via channels like your image, like your personality, like your identity. So all the elements that we've worked with up to this point. So if we were to go back, one more case study before we close on Starbucks. Also, if I took away elements of that logo, I guarantee you, most of you would recognize it. I would even go so far as to say if I took the black and the white away and I just did a green, that shade of green, so that specific shade of green, which is very likely a Starbucks green, would relate to a lot of you that interact with Starbucks on a regular basis. The font, the stars, the iconography, everything about that logo, if elements were removed, you would remember, you would relate to, and you would recognize, because Starbucks has a very strong brand equity. So Starbucks created brand equity by turning our everyday drinks, our coffees, our teas, into a relatively premium product. There is a relative, and I don't mean luxury, I don't mean high-end. I mean premium in that it is an aspirational brand. A lot of us, and you can tell this the minute a Starbucks opened, how many people have taken selfies with Starbucks cups? How many people have gathered at Starbucks as opposed to other coffee brands because they wanted the Starbucks brand, they wanted the Starbucks cup. So all these decisions, all these subliminal preferential choices that consumers are making, choosing Starbucks over another, is a reflection of their brand equity. So Starbucks coffee is not only defined by the product, it's defined by the attitude, by the personality, the friendliness when you get to the counter in most Starbucks. And in addition to that, it's the variety, it's the proposition, it's the brand promise. If you don't like your coffee, just give it back to us, we'll switch it. The turnaround time, generally speaking, is quite quick. The flavors, do you want vanilla? And they were at the forefront of flavored coffees. They were at the forefront of syrup in coffees, at the vanilla lattes and the hazelnut lattes, and looking forward to the festive flavors of toffee nut or, you know, the pumpkin spice at Halloween. Starbucks championed these brand trends. They championed the industry trends within the go-to coffee brand industry. And as a result, as consumers, we responded by being loyal, by seeing their brand image in a positive way, and by having a positive brand equity within us. So Starbucks created this brand equity by providing good customer service. Again, most of the time, Starbucks offers great customer service. And it reflects and collects the suggestion and ideas of the people that go in. You can make a recommendation, they take it on board. And that's how their process of being evolutionary, being at the forefront of the industry, has evolved. So as a result of strong customer loyalty and building strong customer loyalty, Starbucks' image and resultant equity has been very positive. So I tried to use examples today that will relate, because you'll understand the brand, you know what you're working with. And now, very quickly, I want to close by going through how you can take the concept of what we spoke about today and relate it to your business, whether you're small, whether you're medium, whether you manage a team, whether you are your individual brand, product, service. So the 4 ways that you can build brand equity as a small business is the following. Number 1 is know your difference. And we spoke about this from day one. We said for you to sell your value, for you to know your value, for you to create your positioning statement, position your story. There were questions in your story worksheets last week. For you to know your difference and know what makes you unique is number 1. And in building brand equity, that would be at the top of the list again. A great brand starts with a solid, unique selling proposition. And that will come up over and over and over again. In fact, I would love you to remember the acronym USP. It comes up all the time. If you know your USP, if you can communicate your USP in a brand story, and if you can understand ways to make it relatable to various different audience groups, you are a quarter of the way to building strong brand equity. Second of all is to solidify your logo, your slogan, and your brand basics. So this would come under the banner of what we spoke about earlier, your brand identity and creating a strong brand guideline document. Again, this can evolve, this can change, this can be revised. Try not to revise it too often. Try to stick to it. Try to do your market research solidly enough when creating it the first time round or the second time round that you will love it. I always say if you don't look at it and absolutely love it and want to keep looking at it, then chances are it's not going to last long because you're going to tire of it from it before anyone else does. Tell your story. So last week's exercise, last week's program of brand storytelling, which is all about emotion. It's all about commitment. It's all about buy-in. And lastly, if I could wear an illuminated light at the top of my head that said consistency, I would. Be consistently present in the market, be consistent with your messaging, be consistent with your brand promise. Every aspect of your customer touch point relates to consistency. Because as consumers, we don't like change unless we're getting a lot more value than we're putting in as a result. So give us what we know, give us what we love, or improve on it massively and give us more. Be consistent. Be consistent with what you say, what you do, how you say it, how you do it. Deliver on time today and next week and next month. If you are an influencer, be consistent with the style that you present in, with the causes that you associate with how you project yourself. If you're a service, if you're putting out services, you're putting out conferences, if you're putting out any service, house cleaning, couch cleaning, be consistent. Be consistent with your messaging, be on time. If you say you're going to call, be consistent. So there was a lot of information today. There is a lot that will come across to you in your worksheets this week. Some will be purely information, so you can refer back to it when working through your worksheets. A lot of it will be anything you need to refresh. Jump on Instagram, jump on social media, Facebook, jump on the website, and make sure you reach out, because I really, really, really want you to understand the 3 things we spoke about today. I really want you to sit and spinball ideas on color, on typeface, on icons. And like every week we've had, and every week we will have, I'd love you to sit and really think hard about everything we spoke about and how you can relate that to your business. So again, the newsletter, the worksheets, all the news goes out to anyone on the subscription list. So on the website at the very bottom, if your name's not on there, chances are you might miss the subscription and the worksheets. And if you do need anything else, reach out to me. I'm at Mrs. Zarmati is my personal Instagram, or at Be Well Branded, and I respond to both. So I am going to be online for a couple more minutes. If there's anything anyone wants to ask, if there's anything I can answer, let me know. I'm just going to go quickly through the chat. Yes, microphone on. Yes, I know. We got that. Looking great. Excited for today. Amazing. Work through the worksheets. Fantastic. I love that you guys are spending time on those worksheets. They're super, super, super important. And ultimately, if you're giving me an hour of your day, I really want you to take away something of value. And those worksheets are what's going to tie it all together. Super interesting. Thanks, Enrica. Absolute pleasure. Ashik, informative session. Thanks very much. I hope to see you guys next week. Yeah, loads of thank yous, no questions. So amazing. Thank you guys for joining in today. Again, if there's anything, reach out, always here. If you still got questions, please dump them on the chat right now. I'll be on for a couple more minutes. Yeah, love that you're there. Share it with anyone that you think, Tahila, I'm still here. You can throw your question on the chat and I'm happy to answer it. If you've got anyone that you think might benefit from it, please share the link with them. And yeah, join in next week. I will share the topic for next week in Monday's newsletter. I go away from it and I sort of work out where the holes need to be plugged for the next stage, because I really don't want you to skip a stage in this process. So it's super important for me when I go away and I sort of reassess the questions that I got, that everyone sort of processed everything that was shared, or if there's anyone that has major questions and I feel that I might have missed something, I might do a gap fill. But for now, yeah, Monday's newsletter is where you'll find all of that. Maya, I'm glad you appreciated the case studies. Looking forward to build your amazing brand in Morocco. Okay, I'm assisting my boyfriend with his law firm on social media. We found it necessary to have a social media presence these days. Yes, agree. Law firms, financial firms, everyone needs to have a presence on social. Sabrina, if you want to go over the first 2 sessions, I think it would be beneficial. This one will be recorded there as well, so you can maybe go back, watch the first 2. If you're missing worksheets, let me know and I can send them to you. So to go back to you, Tahila, law firms, financial firms, I think everyone has to have a presence. It's how you manage your presence that's critical. You know, naturally speaking, and you come from a marketing background as well, law firms, nightclubs will never be managed the same. With law firm, your language, your visual, everything needs to be quite cleverly done. It's quite difficult to keep it fresh and interesting. Any advice? So with law firms, I think being fresh would always be adding value. So be on top of trends, be on top of new developments in your market. If there's something linked to law firms, maybe share things like elements of a case study. Depending on what area of law they specialize in, I would go into sort of examples, you know, social media calendars we talked about in the first session. I can't emphasize enough how important they are, because for something like that, Tahila, if you've got a social media calendar, you have your whole month in front of you and you literally plug in, okay, today we're doing a motivational quote, tomorrow we're doing a case study, day 3 we're doing something from a legal update in the country, or we're going to look at another market and say, okay, in the UK, let's assume he's in family. In the UK, a law has been passed that wives now get X, Y, and Z, or husbands get X, Y, and Z. Share that. People find it interesting. So there's plenty of content, no matter what industry you're in, there's plenty of content. being fresh will ultimately come down to planning and organization, and social media calendar is the way to do that. Scatter between quotes, between updates, between case studies, or anonymous case studies that you're willing to share. Use a platform to shout out about what the firm has achieved, what they're working on. New hires, meet so and so. This lawyer is very serious in the office, but in his spare time he plays tennis. There's loads of ways to bring personality to an account. What you need to decide before you do that, though, is how you want that personality to develop. So do you want it to get to that point where you want to talk about the non-office space of the team? You don't have to. If you don't want to, you can talk about people's desks, people's habits, people's coffee preferences. The sky's the limit in terms of content. So it's just a case of mapping out how you want that to work. Okay, let me go back to your question. Would love to do a case study within beauty, skincare, makeup. Absolutely. Very easy to do. I can try build that in. I'll actually just write that down now. I can build that into next week's. Absolutely no problem. If you want to shoot me a mail as well, Enrica, about what area you're specifically in, and I can try tailor make that case study to suit what you specifically are looking for. Still finding my audience challenging. It is a process. There's a few, maybe what I'll do is I'll do a refresher on audience audits and how to discover that. Maybe we can do a little bit of that next week. And maybe there's a few more tools, because I'm sure you're not the only one struggling to sort of define that audience. And remember, you've got macro and micro, so you'll communicate different things to different people. So that's all there. And yeah, audiences, it's a number of things. I think start with your main touch points, your social media, your website, all your analytics. So analyzing audience is a lot of market research, a lot of data analysis, whatever data you have at your disposal, and then work back from there. Make sure you've got Google Analytics on the back end of your website. Make sure you're looking at your insights, at your Instagram account as a business account, all these elements that will funnel in. You just need to collect as much data as possible and review it to start understanding where your audiences sit. Is it possible to have social media calendar and case studies for an NPO and an author or publisher brand? Absolutely. I will make a note of that. Case studies for author. Also, Fatima, if you want to look at the podcast I put up, so Well Branded's also launched a podcast, and we'll be talking to various personalities in the industry on how they're succeeding as a personal brand, a service, a business, how they've built brands, marketing directors of big companies. There's so much coming up on the podcast, and I'm so excited to share it. So the first one that we had up last week was with Dale Herbst, a fantastic publisher from South Africa, giving us a really good insight into the world of publishing. So I'm not sure which element of publishing you're interested in, but maybe take a listen to the podcast. They're all not very long, 30, 40 minutes. And yeah, absolutely can look at something more author, NPO, publishing based. Hi, Tegan. Did you say we can rewatch the first? Absolutely, Tegan, you can rewatch it. On your newsletter that you got, it'll take you through to a YouTube page, and all of the webinars are on there. So they're all on the Well Branded YouTube page. Shaheen, some tips for finding your USP, especially when many markets seem flush. The USP is very much going to start from what your business is, what sets you apart. The kind of questions you need to be asking yourself when trying to define your USP is, who am I? What makes me different? What's my brand personality? What stage of my brand story defines me from something else? If I'm a furniture brand or clothing, if I'm in manufacturing or production, is it the fact that I actually pay attention to my entire production line, that I care about my factories in Cambodia or Vietnam, and I care about the working conditions, and I want my audiences to know that the premium or the extra price attached to my product is because the process I go through to make sure that everyone along the way is well looked after, and there's fair trade practices, and it's an ethical process. Ethics is always a big part of branding these days, and ethics sometimes impacts the cost of an item, but generally if that's communicated in your story and communicated in your identity, your image will reflect it, and your consumers will be happy to support it accordingly. Let me just see if there's anything else. I'll stay on for another 2 minutes or so if anybody else wants to ask a question. So yeah, thanks guys. I appreciate all the questions. I love the questions because whilst the slides and the notes that I work off when I sit and create the webinar is quite broad because I have to try and factor in everybody that's on the call, having your questions helps me make it immediately tailor-made to what you need. So please feel free to drop me a line at any stage and I can either answer it on here, or if you're too shy or don't want to put it up here, it's quite specific or personal or private, you can send it to me directly on Instagram or via email. So yes, appreciate everyone tuning in. We'll be back here next Saturday at the same time. I'll do it for an hour again. Stick to the hour and stay on for questions after for anyone that does want to stay on. And I'll send you your newsletters all on Monday with your worksheets. So I'm going to leave it there because I think that's about all the questions for now. Thanks so much for joining, and I really, really appreciate your time on a Saturday. Yeah, and if you have any cool images from today, share them and I'll repost them. So thanks for tuning in. I'll see you guys all next week. Yeah, and I appreciate the time. Take care and see you then.